Thank you, everybody, for joining us. My name is Jeff Ransdell. I head compliance at CJ. I've been trying to count this out, and I think I counted out to 14 CJUs for me. I missed one in the middle. I've spoken about half of them. I've had a number of roles here: sales, biz dev, client dev, operations, but compliance has been my focus for the last set of years, and it's been very exciting, and I think this will be a very interesting conversation for everybody. So as we look at this title here, the good and the bad and the ugly, I guess the question comes up, what does that mean? And really what we're trying to do here is we want to talk about the good things you can do, the bad things to do, and really the ugly things that are going to happen to you potentially. But we also want to talk about growth and how compliance can help drive growth. One thing I do want to point out right now is that there's a lot of people in this room right now. I did this presentation about 6 years ago, and there was one person in the room. And she was an employee. So something has changed a little bit since then, and compliance has got a different angle to it, and I think this is going to be an interesting conversation for everybody. You might be here because compliance feels like a burden. You know, it's a lot of work, it's a lot to do, and you're not really sure if you're doing the right things. You might also be here because it seems like a black box, and you want to learn some tips and tricks. Ultimately, you might be coming here just learning how to do something better. But really, what we're here to do and why we're up here today is because being compliant isn't about avoiding getting busted. It's about driving quality. And what I mean by that is if you're driving quality because of your compliance efforts, then you're driving more value for your business. And if you're driving more value for your business, you can drive growth. And I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, we had a large client named eBay. You're all familiar with them. I think they joined in about 2001. And they went through a very, very interesting life cycle of quality and value and growth. When they launched with us, their business was all about getting new users signed up. We want more people in our marketplace just signing up. I'll pay $5 for every person who joins the eBay marketplace. Once they hit a critical mass with that, they then said, no, I don't want just signups. I want people who are actually using the system. They're actually bidding on things and buying things. And I'm willing to pay $20 for that. And then they drove their business that way. It was very, very successful. Eventually, they ended up leaving the network because their economics changed tremendously, because they then wanted to pay not on new users or active users. They just wanted to pay on activity and lifetime value. And that's a very different kind of calculation. But it's a really neat thing and a neat way to do it. And I point that out because when we talk about quality and value and growth, you can see kind of that thread through there. I do have a quote too, and I won't tell you who on the panel gave it. You can figure out who she is later. But she made this quote as we were setting up these sessions. We had a bunch of get-togethers and talked through what we want to talk about. And she made the quote, "Trouble can end your company, but compliance can make you money." And I think that's an important phrase, and you're going to hear that as we go through the sessions here. One last caveat as we dive in is that when we talk about compliance, we're talking about compliance for everyone. This isn't just bashing publishers because they're the ones that always get kicked for an error. This is compliance for advertisers, agencies, networks, and publishers. And advertisers who are doing excessive reversals or taking their tracking pixel down at a certain time of days because they're done paying for leads, agencies who may not be sharing the right information, networks who are inconsistent with enforcement. So this is across the board. This is for everybody here today. So again, going back to how does the title match with the growth? When we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, obviously that's kind of cool. I can talk about Westerns. I like Westerns. Cowboys are cool. It lets me put up a picture of Clint Eastwood. That's cool too. So we get to do all that. But we also want to flip it around and make sure that we understand that this is not the wild, wild west anymore. 15 years ago, yes, it might have been. It could have been everybody taking shots, everybody doing everything they can, shooting from the hip to make money as fast as they could and get out. And that's not where we are today. It's a very professional business, and that's really what we're going to get into as we go through this. By its definition, performance advertising should be the most transparent channel you have. You should have absolute clarity in the terms of the transactions you're getting, what you're paying for, and the value you're getting back. So again, going back to quality as value and value as growth. All right, so let's get to the presenters here. This is my favorite page of notes because it just says wing it. So I'm going to wing it here. So fortunately, we've got these guys lined up in order. On the far end there, Linda Goodman, she's the founder of the Goodman law firm based in San Diego. She has participated in this industry for many, many years on panels. She's an expert in internet compliance law, and she spends a lot of time with state attorney generals. So welcome, Linda, please. We're really glad to have her here.
Thank you very much.
Next to her is David Lewis. If you spent any time at CJU in past years, you know him because he's been walking the halls probably as long as I have. He's started a number of businesses on the publisher side, done a certain amount of consulting. I think you've been in search, coupons, toolbars. Did I miss anything?
Cashback.
Cashback.
Everything your team works on.
Everything. Okay. So you get dinged a lot then.
Not me personally.
Not you personally. Okay. Fair enough. Well, welcome, David. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And I will say it's really good to have him here because we've worked together for so many years. It's just nice to be able to collaborate a little bit and do this together. So
it's good to be on the same side.
It is. It is. We're all facing the same way now.
And he's also being characterized as the loose cannon on the panel as well.
That's right. That's right. The guy with the tie and the loose cannon. That's right.
And they set him next to the lawyer.
So next is David Nafziger. Many of you may know him as the CEO of Brand Verity. They do keyword and content monitoring and detection. He's also the lead of the working group for the PMA compliance team. So welcome, David. Next to him is Adam. Adam is the chairman and co-founder of IMWave. They've been doing search marketing for, what, 10?
Since 2003.
Since 2003. So what is that, 12 years? Doing the math there?
I didn't come here to do math.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. So welcome, Adam. It's great to have you here. And then last but not least, Peter Wilson. He's a CEO at Lashback. Lashback does email monitoring and compliance for advertisers, agencies, and publishers. And we're very lucky to have him here too. Thanks. So let's go ahead and dive in. So when we were staging all of this information, we got together, and I did individually, and then we got together as a group, and we talked about what are the things that we thought would resonate from each of them, what were they passionate about, and then we synthesized those things and figured out, okay, what was across everybody, what were they passionate about, and what could we really drive home as a team. And these were the 4 topics that really came about. Number 1, compliance is everyone's responsibility. Again, going back to agencies, advertisers, networks, and publishers. The second part that stood out was professional standards. This is a professional industry. Again, it's not the wild, wild west. So how do we set the standards? How do we get good people working with good people? Third, transparency. The value of transparency and making sure that everybody understands the rules of engagement. And then last but not least, the FTC. Really, I just threw an acronym up there. We'll talk about the FTC. But really, this is the space holder for all the big brothers that are out there that you need to be aware of and take into consideration as you work out your businesses. So let's go ahead and jump into compliance as everyone's responsibility. Linda, I'll hit you first. Compliance is a broad term. In your experience, what are the subsets that go into defining compliance?
This is like a quiz show. I love it.
It is.
Okay.
It is.
Compliance, if you walk in and you tell somebody, oh, there's a compliance panel going on, the first thing they'll say is, oh, FTC, oh, the law, oh, Attorney General. It depends upon who they've gotten hit with. Compliance isn't about any of that, and that's a part of it. But what compliance is about, it's about risk assessment. It's about your company, your brand. What risk are you willing to take in your marketing before you say no more? Then, once you've made that decision, it's about telling your officers and all of your employees that that's our decision. This is going to be our compliance. We're going to go to this level. And you make it very clear. And then when you go out to get vendors or publishers, or if you are a publisher and you're looking for advertising, it's about going out and telling those people, this is our risk level. Your risk level certainly has to take into account the laws and the regulations in the Federal Trade Commission. But that risk level is very different between people. The key to it, I think, for keeping a culture of compliance going is that you have to tell everyone about it. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think most people fall down.
It's interesting you brought up culture of compliance. It's also interesting that you brought up risk, because when you talk about CPM, CPC, CPA, you tend to think that on the CPA side, the publishers are taking all the risk. Whereas CPC, it's a little more blended, and then CPM, it's more on the advertiser side. And so even in this area where theoretically the publisher are taking all the risk in terms of putting ad space, ad inventory up, and hoping or intending to get paid, really, working to get paid, ultimately the advertisers still have a risk out there, is your point too.
Well, the advertiser is strictly liable for the publisher, so whether they know about it or not. So if the publisher isn't, if you have not told the publisher what you expect from them, and they have a higher risk level than you do, you're going to find that you're sitting with the publisher, on the wrong side of the table with the Federal Trade Commission or Attorney General, District Attorney, whoever comes after you, and you're responsible for their conduct. And people think that's so unfair. Well, the reason that is because you didn't tell the publisher what you expected from them on the risk level. If you did and they did what they said, well, then, you're going to be sitting right next to them. So make sure you understand your risk and make sure you communicate that to publishers, the risk.
Mm-hmm. Now, Peter, let me ask you this. In your view, how big of an issue do you think marketers view compliance? How big is this on their radar? And is it different depending on a different vertical?
I mean, I think it's a pretty significant risk. On the advertiser side, they're thinking about things from protecting their brand and embarrassing their organization all the way down to fines and litigation costs. So it's certainly significant. And I don't know that advertisers are always aware of the risks that are out there. We certainly see on a regular basis that there are networks or publishers, to Linda's point, I think, that are significantly more aggressive than the advertiser's intent. We're in the email channel and we see email on a daily basis, and you can see that there are a number of networks and publishers that are out there that just sort of do that calculated risk game when it comes to quality. And there can be an important disconnect between that distribution and the advertisers. So I think it's a very significant issue to keep an eye on.
Okay, fair enough. David Knapziger, what can advertisers do to mitigate compliance issues from the start? If they're launching
it's one of my favorite topics.
Yeah.
So I think there are a number of things that we see that really we'd love to see advertisers do more of. I think first and foremost, it's understanding the publisher business model. It's not one business model. It's all of the ones he described and a bunch more. And understanding both where they source their traffic, how they source their traffic, or how they generate sales or leads. And I think sort of understanding that is sort of step one to being really mitigating potential issues, because then you know what to expect. And then the second thing is to codify the level of risk into your terms and conditions, and do so in a way that is transparent, readable, understandable, doesn't leave intent up for interpretation. I think we see that, I'm sure you see that all the time. And be very specific with what's allowed and not allowed. And I also tend to argue to be specific with when you allow people to make it, or when you're going to make an exception. So that when somebody sees something, maybe it's a coupon publisher running on a trademark plus term that's been authorized, they don't think that, oh my gosh, something terrible is going wrong. They recognize that this is part of the way the program is intended to run. I think we'll dive into some of that a little bit later as well.
Okay.
So one of the important issues, though, I think, is that there's two sides to the equation, right? There's setting the right standards at the front end, and then there's monitoring behavior. And you really can't do one without the other.
Right.
If you don't set good standards and you're just monitoring, you're not getting the job done. And if you set the standards and you don't monitor, you're also missing a big piece of the equation.
Yeah, it's a bit of the trust but verify.
Correct.
I've heard a couple of Reagan quotes in a few sessions, and that's certainly one of them.
And it's being clear about what it is that you want. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of times where you'll go in and you'll understand what the guidelines are. You'll have the conversation, but what they're monitoring is completely different. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they don't even understand. Advertisers may not understand what the monitoring tools are telling them. Mm-hmm. So it gets complicated.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because you gave us this quote: "Without monitoring, one person breaking the rules is quickly mimicked by others, thereby diluting the brand message and increasing costs." What's the publisher's role in compliance?
I think the publisher's role is multifold. I mean, understanding what the terms are, communicating with the advertiser so that the advertiser is educated about the business model and how you operate, and then clearly understanding what restrictions may or may not be put in place so that everyone knows this is what's going to happen and everyone's on the same page. The problem is when people aren't on the same page, or they're making assumptions, or the T's and C's are very vague, and they don't have the conversation up front, then it can all fall apart. So if everyone's on the same page going in, saying this is what we're going to test, this is how we're going to do it, things seem to work out better that way.
How much collaboration do you have with the advertisers you're partnered with?
We try and collaborate as much as possible. We always have a collaboration up front, as far as here's what we're going to test. Here are any restrictions that we need to put in place in the search space, negative keywords that we need to put in to make sure that we're not interfering with our own internal campaigns. And it's all about getting the search team comfortable with what's going to happen, the affiliate team comfortable with what's going to happen, and having everybody on the same page, knowing that we're trying to drive incremental sales to benefit the company, and then helping everyone out. And if we're all on the same page, things go smoothly. It's when an advertiser will say, hey, these are the terms that we want you to put in as negative exact, and all of a sudden they're monitoring something completely different. Well, that's not on the list.
Yeah.
And we're not even bidding on that.
We're all laughing, but we've all experienced it.
It
right?
happens.
Yeah.
And sometimes, no, we're not bidding on that. Google has decided, or Microsoft decided to match us to that on a brand match. And so just understanding how the ecosystem works and what the reports are really showing.
So 2 questions out of that from me. One is, you've been doing this for 12 years. How long before were you doing this when you realized how much collaboration needed to go into talking with the advertisers?
Oh, it's changed over the years. When we first started, it was check a box and start marketing whoever you can. There was very little monitoring. Most companies weren't doing their own search at that time. They were just happy that, wow, you got us into Google.
Right.
That's awesome. I think it's changed a lot as companies have understood the value of search. They all have their own internal search teams or agencies working on their behalf, and coming up with how do we grow incremental sales for them and do it in such a way that we're doing well by their brand. We're not saying something that's against their own brand guidelines. And some companies have large documents of, hey, here's our brand and how it needs to be presented, and we're happy to take that. But as long as we know up front what it is you want, then it's good. So to your question, I think it's much more about the relationship now. And in the old days, in the Wild West days, it wasn't like that at all.
Gotcha. And you alluded to what my second question was going to be again when you talked about other departments within the advertiser's business, the affiliate team, the search team, the email team, whatever other teams might be in there. How much conflict or collaboration what's the weighting of that you see when you're working with advertisers? What are the challenges you have there?
Well, for us, it's always,
if there are any.
For us, it's always the search team, right? Because we're doing search, and everyone is doing their own search. So getting them to understand that our model doesn't increase their costs, doesn't take away from what they're doing, and that we're here if something happens and all of a sudden Google's decided this keyword, we're above them on something, and they were showing instead of them talking it through and saying, hey, we can lower the bids on that, we can add a negative in for that, we can make adjustments on the fly to make sure that we're all going in the same direction.
Gotcha.
On that point, there's an issue that comes up with advertisers when there is an SEO team, an SEM team, and an affiliate team. And each one talks
always
about...
talk, don't they? They're always in sync.
They always talk. They talk about my traffic, your traffic, not our traffic. And if they report into the same person, they have the same P&L, that works well. When they're fighting with each other, they don't realize there are 7 touch points before a buy. That's the average. So that means, yeah, you might get somebody on the first one, you might get somebody on the 12th. But 7 average means, yes, it touched SEM, it touched SEO, and it touched affiliate at some point. So they need to work together to make sure everybody does better.
And the other thing that I think you alluded to, and your question sort of did as well, Jeff, and we'll often see where the affiliate team, working with someone like Adam, will put together a set of, a policy and approach, and they'll be agreed within the team on what they're doing in paid search, but no one's really sat down and worked with the SEM team to figure out if those are the right things.
Right.
And all of a sudden, somebody somewhere surfaces something up that like, oh my gosh, you can get updated, I believe this is happening. It's often the affiliate that gets caught in the middle because the affiliate team didn't pre-negotiate internally to make sure they'd figured out what the right thing to do was.
So Dave, you just said caught in the middle, and this is going to be my question for David Lewis here, is what the network being in the middle, what can the networks do to help alleviate some compliance issues for both advertisers and publishers?
The two things are, one, be a neutral arbitrator. It doesn't always happen that way. The worst example was an advertiser who decided a few months after the fact to reverse transactions that had already been paid. And that is such a problem because if you think about somebody like Adam, he set his budgets based on those transactions. You think about cashback. They've already paid out a lot of that money. And oftentimes the network said, what are we supposed to do? It's what the advertiser wants. They pay the bills, not realizing that the bills are being paid based on the traffic, which is coming from costs of the publisher. The other thing is I like interactive sessions. So show of hands, everybody here has a smartphone. When you first get it, you turn it on and you accept the terms. How many people have read 100% of those terms? Interesting.
It was a great sell.
All right, the lawyer has. Okay.
The lawyer read it.
She wrote the terms.
Right, so that's why you read them.
Yeah.
So I was an econ major in college. I don't like economic inefficiency. I don't like when one person can do the work but then forces it out to hundreds or thousands. And that's the thing about the terms. The terms are different. David alluded to this. They're not uniform. And what's more, it's just data. Does the advertiser allow paid search? Yes or no? It's usually in the system somewhere hard to find. Do they allow coupons, or is there a different policy with that? Guess what? It's just data. It's in the system. Do they allow cashback? You name a policy that Jeff's team ends up having to deal with somebody breaking the rules, it's in there. Well, why not make it easy for us to get? Instead of saying, the knee-jerk reaction of read the terms. It's great. We work with when I had my business, we had 3,000 stores. Read all of those terms, know when they change. You're going to have somebody who's more of a junior level, knowing where to find what, I would just do Control F and have to find it and read it. It doesn't make sense. What about having a file or an API that we can get that shows us our advertisers, ones we want to apply to, and just make it simple?
I just want to add to that. I absolutely agree with that. Use an acceptable use policy. Show the publisher what's acceptable, what's not. Make sure your negative search words are on an API that they can reach at any time, and anyone on their team can reach it. Make it public. Make it transparent. Don't hide it from them. Now, that being said, clawbacks are wonderful if you're an advertiser.
Not when it's closed.
I know.
We're about to go backwards here for a second.
They're so effective. If you want to, and I'm not saying a clawback without being able to sit down and go, here is why I'm clawing back. Here, you knew about it. It was on my acceptable use policy. I showed it to you. You had a sub-publisher, and it's almost always going to be some smaller sub-publisher or somebody who's trying to make their month-end numbers, and they go, well, we'll just change a few things here. And all of a sudden, lashbacks flashing up like crazy. Do I think you should keep it weeks and weeks and weeks and months out? Absolutely not. But I'll tell you what, one of the most effective ways of getting compliant people and non-compliant people on your brands is use that clawback. And use the harshest clawback you can on the harshest things you want to avoid, like fraud. If I have fraud, I'm going to claw back everything. You monitor for fraud. Otherwise, I'm taking even the good stuff back. If it's not fraud, if it's a mistake, or it's a publisher they didn't know was on the system, okay, I'm only going to take back what that publisher should, what I paid for that particular traffic. Or I'm going to take back that campaign, which may also limit the exposure for the network.
Off the record, I don't disagree with you.
Okay, but don't tell anybody. Okay.
But to the point of making it public, having it where I have to go and search and pull up a page is different from, let's say, trademark bidding. Imagine this. It's in the API. Adam's team pulls it down, and when an advertiser switches from yes to no, it goes into Adam's system. It automatically turns off all of his campaigns. They add negative keywords. It goes into Adam's system. It goes to Google. It goes to Microsoft. It automatically negative matches on those terms. Wouldn't that be better than, you as an advertiser, do you want Adam spending time reading the policies and checking and manually doing it, making mistakes because it's all manual? Or do you just want to have it automatically flow in, and lo and behold, he's now spending time marketing and finding new ways to work with you and drive sales?
That's an outstanding point that you just made in terms of categorizing everybody as marketers and driving the positive as opposed to hammering on the negative.
Right.
So Excellent.
Yeah,
Let's
one more thing on
we gotta
that.
move. We gotta move on.
All right, but
we're running out of time.
We'll miss the FTC if you don't
on the
move
flip side of that, there have been so many occasions where we'll start working with an advertiser, start talking to an advertiser, and we'll point out that there's somebody that's being non-compliant, and they'll come back and say, "Oh, but they're driving so much revenue." So they don't want to take the action to remove someone who's being non-compliant and not following the rules because they don't want to lose the revenue in their channel that they're generating from being non-compliant.
Yeah.
So
And that's the
everyone's
risk.
got to be on the same
Right.
page.
But that's the risk level.
Right.
You know, they have to know.
But there needs to be an equity too. There needs to be equity back with the other publishers and a certain level of transparency.
If
about
that's
who
your
can do
case,
what.
then change your terms. And if you want to have the Wild West, to have it. But
Yeah.
you're going to get what you're going to get.
Okay, we have to move on.
I absolutely
Sorry, we got to
agree
move
with
on.
you. Okay.
We'll come back to it. So let's move on to professional standards. Peter, what's the emerging dialogue that you're hearing out that's trending out there? You know, I think one of the phrases we heard earlier was culture of compliance. What goes into that, and what are you hearing out there?
I guess we would say we've been approached recently by a lot of clients and a lot of advertisers. And I know, obviously, the network can be a great resource for them. But it seems to us, I guess, that there are a lot of folks that are trying to determine sort of best-in-class resources and publishers and service providers. And, that's still done pretty informally. And it would be nice, I think, if that came together in maybe a more structured way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of conversations from our perspective that are going on about that sort of thing. And I don't know exactly how it's going to come together, but I just see a lot of demand for it.
And the general phrase that I think you use, and I've heard other people use it, is good people wanting to work with good people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
there's always gray areas. To the point, right? No. To your point.
I know in the white chair.
To your
he was
point.
going to get a shorter chair too.
Wearing a black shirt last night. I'm the toss that went out there.
That is one
That
of
would
the
be
challenging. That is one of the challenging things about this entire conversation is everybody knows what's clean as the driven snow, and everyone knows what's black hat, but there's an awful lot of gray in between. Mm-hmm. And there's this balance between risk tolerance and volume and all that sort of thing. That's really where a lot of the difficulty in conversation needs to occur.
Mm-hmm. So Adam, let's jump to you because you got the finger pointed at you a minute ago. If you're a relatively new marketer and you want to demonstrate that you're a good person, that you want to work with other good people, how do you build that trust? How do you build that reputation?
Well, I think from an advertiser perspective, as a marketer and an advertiser, you need to communicate with your internal team at CJ and figure out who are the good actors and who has the reputation.
Okay.
And just jumping in and working with anyone, you're not sure what you're going to get. So I think as a new advertiser and a new marketer in the system, it's important to lean on the resources that are available to you, the outsourced program managers, the all those agencies and your internal teams to say, who are the reputable people who have been around and can help grow your business.
Okay. So then if we move to David Lewis real quick, what are the issues that are status quo now that you think should be revisited?
Well, the status quo is shifts. What Adam was talking about with the way it was with search back in the early days. As a go-to, which it really was the Wild West. And then in 2004, I wrote some articles. I had been trademark bidding and kind of changed things because whereas affiliates, as they were then called, now publishers, were saying, it's my right to bid on your brand. And I said, well, actually, it's my privilege. And said you should pick the ones you want. Make it against rules for everybody and pick the ones you want who can help you. But also, way back then, CJ wasn't all that publisher friendly. Not at all. It was pretty bad. And then, my first CJU, I have stories about that. But anyway, it's come a long way. And the first publisher advisory board, the early ones, I'd be beating up CJ, like, why aren't you enforcing your terms? And one of the great things that's changed, Carrie did a lot to make it more publisher friendly. Bringing Jeff back and having network quality, I was thrilled to hear about network quality. Kind of funny given my relationship with Jeff and Yelena and team. But for the most part, they do the right thing. And for the status quo, I think it's really, I like quoting Rodney King, that sage. Can't we all just get along? And that's what really needs to be done. The publishers need to be transparent. Mm-hmm. And that's really the main issue. And the advertisers need to look at it and trust that Jeff and his team are getting rid of the bad guys. There were, back in 2008, there's a lot of bad stuff that was going on, and I think for the most part it's been cleaned up. So instead of just jumping to what you did's wrong, you are out, goodbye. One problem when I had a cashback site is I couldn't actually say when there was fraud coming from China, not from us. I couldn't call an advertiser and say, hey, listen, here are the fraudulent transactions, please reverse them. And let's figure out what it was and how they got through and make sure they don't get through on both sides. And something that you had said that it's really just perverse incentives, because the answer always came back, except for buy costumes, was no, we'll just terminate you, you keep the money. Because the affiliate manager would get in trouble if there was fraud coming through the program. So the easiest thing to do would just be to terminate and never hear about it again. And things like that are a problem.
It's interesting you use the phrase, can we all just get along? I think that speaks a lot to what everybody talks about quite a bit in affiliate marketing is the relationships. And the relationships are important. But then the question becomes, how many relationships can you actually manage well? How do you scale beyond the ones that you can actually talk to? And we'll get into that more a little later on. But that's really kind of, I think, what's driving a lot of people is okay, I may have hit a plateau here in terms of the number of relationships I can manage. I'm asking for more affiliations, but it's that much more compliance risk that I have to manage too. So how do we expand the scale but keep the quality with it? I think it's the kind of the questions that are coming around. Linda, if a marketer being an advertiser or publisher is just starting to wrap their head around compliance, where should they start? What's the starting point for them?
The starting point is get an internet attorney, an internet marketing attorney. That's not your uncle. It's not your ex-divorce attorney.
It could be.
It's not your real estate attorney.
It's not.
And tell him what you do. Show him your business model.
Or her.
Or her.
Come on, Brian.
I like that. You got bonus points. And the second thing is, tell that attorney how you want to market it. Is it email? Is it search? Is it how are you thinking right now you want to market it? Ask that attorney to provide you with two things. One is what laws apply to my business model and what laws apply to how I'm going to market it. Do not let that attorney give you a treatise. It should be an outline. It should have pictures in it. So if you need a disclosure, there should be a screenshot of what the proper disclosure is. There should be a screenshot of what the bad disclosure is. What you do with that material, once you get that back from the attorney, you sit down and you decide, what is my risk level? How close do I want to go over that line? Well, okay, right now you don't want to go over the line. Okay, that's the line. How close? So now you know what law applies to you. You know what it's supposed to look like. Now you're in a position to start creating your protocols, and that is knowing this. And let's say I'm really small, right? It's me and 3 other people, and we're still downstairs in my mom's basement. That's fine. Give all 3 people the memo. When you go in to talk to a publisher, say, this is my protocol, right? This is it. I know I have to have these disclosures. I know you have to have these disclosures, and I want to see what you're doing. As you grow, keep that building out. So you may hire 15 people, now you have to train them. As you keep growing economically or financially, keep a budget to keep going back to that attorney and going, okay, now I'm expanding to this, but I want that memo because I want to know what I'm supposed to tell other people I'm doing. The most important thing is once you establish your policies, you've established a protocol, as soon as you can, you need David and Peter. Because here's the clue. What you know they're doing isn't going to get you in trouble. What you don't know what's happening is going to get you in trouble. I can't tell you how many clients have called me and they got a CID, which is the beginning of an investigation from an FTC, and they're like, I never saw this advertisement. I never saw this what they're doing here. I never authorized that. And honestly, the FTC doesn't care because it was a lead gen, you took the money, so guess what? You're going to give all the money back plus.
So you just referenced working with companies like Peter and David's,
Yeah.
And I want to jump to that real quick because that brings up the question, what are the things that marketers need to do if they work with a monitoring service? And that's for Peter and David to throw out there. What should they be thinking about?
So I think whether you're working with a monitoring service, an agency that uses a monitoring service, a network that uses a monitoring service, I think you need to evaluate 3 core components. Who are the people involved that are going to do the work? What's the process you're going to implement, that you're going to put in place to review the data, to take action, to follow up? And then what's the technology kind of behind it? What's that technology capable of? And where are its blind spots? And so if it's someone working directly with someone like us, the same things apply as someone working through a network or through an agency.
And that goes to the point that Adam made earlier about the advertiser needs to understand the technology
Yes.
and what they're actually seeing and how to interpret it.
And how to take, and we'll typically, I'm sure Peter is something very similar, we'll help them take their policy and translate it into rules in our system with and the data behind it, so that the things they get back should be relatively actionable. But even then, there needs to be a process for looking at the data, whether it's daily or weekly or monthly or whatever the frequency is that somebody's going through it. Do you have 1 strike, 2 strikes, 3 strikes? What's your process? What's your escalation process? Does it depend upon who the advertiser is? Yes, it should. Does it? What's the letter you're sending out, and who's doing the work? And oh, geez, what do you do when you have a disagreement and you can't settle it, and how do you escalate those things? I think those things all get sorted out relatively quickly, but we certainly see people that start the process and just expect, I've turned on monitoring and now everything's okay. There's a little bit of work necessary to sort of correct the things that the technology finds.
Sure. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think you're exactly right, but it's unfortunate when you see someone invest in the resources to be able to identify the problems and then not take it to completion.
Yes.
They'll identify it, it'll be in the system, it's flagged, it's a violation of their rules, and yet they don't do the follow-up action, and you really haven't done yourself much service if you don't follow all the way through.
Well, maybe
Well,
that
and
comes
that's
back to
actually
risk tolerance, right?
Yeah, that's actually a legal problem because now all you've documented is the violations.
Mm-hmm.
And not doing anything is what's going to get you in trouble.
There hasn't been any enforcement. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the last thing you wanted to do once you have your protocols and your establishment. You want to tell your employees, if you see a violation, this is what you do.
It's kind of like a SOX narrative. You got to write what you do and then actually do it.
Right.
So, okay.
Well, and not actually do it. But here's the thing. You don't have to, fire a publisher because you found a compliance problem. You have to suspend him. You have to send him something, go, we need to talk because did you know this was a violation? And did you know actually that you were doing it?
So you bring up an excellent point, and I hadn't planned to talk about this, but this is really for everybody in the audience. In CJ's experience, we have an outstanding record of what we would call rehabilitating publishers who make errors. It is very, very rare that we warn a publisher more than once or twice. If we do, usually they go all the way to the limit and then they're gone. But we're talking the very high 90 percentile in terms of the amount of publishers that once they understand that they've done something wrong, they will correct it. So that goes to your point.
And that's really important because everybody wants to blame the publisher and then fire him. And then, whoop, problem's gone. And it's like, guess what? Problem's going to come back under a different name.
Yep.
It's far better to sit down and go and try to work with the publisher and say, no, you can't change email. Can't change that from line. Mm-hmm. And then tell them why they can't change it from line. Oftentimes you can work with them. If you're not inboxing with your from line, work with them to get a from line that they can get it into the inbox or at least high in the spam filter.
Excellent. We got to jump to transparency. Adam, this was your quote when we were talking about most problems come from miscommunication or people not asking questions. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, I think if it all comes down to communication and all being on the same page, mm-hmm. right? If this David system puts out and says, hey, this advertiser is showing up on this keyword, you got to pick up the phone and ask the question, assuming that there's guilt or intent before communicating causes way too many problems.
Okay.
So it's upfront understanding and then open communication throughout the process so that there aren't any misunderstandings. And policies change. Communicating those policy changes over time, making sure that everyone's on the same page all the time. Businesses change, policies change. We're here to try and grow your business and make sure everything's working the way you want, but we need to know about it. Mm-hmm. And just updating a policy without communicating that it's been updated, there's no alert in the CJ platform that a policy has been updated or special terms and conditions, if you can even find them in the platform, that those have been changed. It just doesn't happen. So you have to have an open relationship and communication with your partners.
Okay. So David Lewis, full transparency, have you ever done a bad thing?
No.
No. The lawyer says you have.
Can I take the fifth?
No, but you can give me $50 and I'll just sit over here and be quiet.
Okay.
That's pretty cheap.
I have not had the intent to do something wrong in the affiliate world. Some of my clients have had the intent to do some things wrong. I generally fire those. But some of them, things do happen. We were advertising on Blair. Chris Park's a great guy, had permission, everybody's happy, and then get a call from Hastings about us putting Blair ads on Hastings keywords. We didn't do that. It turns out Google decided that Blair and Hastings are the same.
Yeah.
But Hastings was pissed off at us. We didn't do anything. But we hear from network quality that we're doing something wrong. Well, we're not. Things like that happen. And sometimes on transparency is publishers can't always say everything that they do or where things are. And there are a variety of reasons. Either they don't have control over it like that, or it's just they don't want, it's proprietary and they don't want it getting out. So there has to be an understanding of that. But I think you do need to look for somebody who's being transparent and giving information and talking about the things that they can talk about.
The type of example that I think that you brought is also really notable in that it's super correctable really quickly.
We negative matched Hastings on Blair.
Right? Like, 15 minutes, it's solved.
Yeah.
But if someone chooses to escalate that up or try and sever the relationship, all of a sudden, that everyone has invested way more time and energy in solving a problem that is easily corrected on its own.
Right. Start out nicely. Be cooperative, and if people aren't cooperative, or if you do talk to Jeff's team and say, okay, I saw this. Are these guys, above board, or are they kind of sketchy? And they know.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing from the advertiser side. We find all the time when we're running ads that sometimes tracking will go down. Did you know tracking will go down? We don't go to the advertiser and say, you're intentionally pulling down tracking to steal from us. No, they had a technical glitch. They're not tracking anymore. Sales don't just keep going from here to zero, and then there's something wrong.
So it has to go both ways then.
Of course it does. It's a partnership.
So you talked about transparency and admitting if something goes wrong. How do you shine a light on good people?
I think that there's probably opportunities for more things like awards and certifications, and trying to really elevate and bring attention to those folks that are really doing great work and following best practices in the marketplace. One of the things that's sort of interesting, I think, is I've also been on many conversations where we talk about what are some of the things that we can do on the other side of the spectrum with some of the bad actors. And I can tell you, I've spent personally many hours sort of on those kinds of conversations, and there's really just not a good solution. It's so difficult to define, and I guess subjective and difficult to execute, that it just doesn't seem like it ever sort of comes to fruition. So I think trying to find more ways to kind of elevate those that are following good practices, maybe it's more certifications and that kind of thing, I think could be a real positive in the market.
Okay, great. We're going to jump to the FTC, and if you have kids, then the sound that went through your head just now was dun, dun, dun. So, David, I think David Napsiger, you gave us this quote. I'm not sure that what people are worried about is really what the FTC is worried about. What did you mean by that?
I think I just watched Princess Bride.
Okay, fair enough. That answers a lot of things right there.
We see a lot of advertisers who have read and are aware that the FTC is making changes and not making changes, that they're shining an increasing focus on online marketing. And they're very quick to jump to the conclusion. They're like, it's almost like a deer in headlights. They like, oh my gosh, I can't grow my program, I can't do whatever. And when you look at most of the enforcement actions, they're against the worst actors. They're against the people who've intentionally misrepresented. Somebody in the program has intentionally misrepresented. Oftentimes, the advertiser did it with awareness. There are situations where claims were made about a particular weight loss drug that were just flat out false. Mm-hmm. And I think people tend to get a little bit stuck in trying to figure out what the right thing to do is and should they be doing something. And for the vast majority of folks in this room, most likely the answer is, start asking for disclosures on the site. There's certainly best practices about where it should be and how it should be and where it should be, but for goodness sake, just get it on the site.
Yeah.
And once you've gotten that, you've probably mitigated the vast majority of your risk. And then, for the people who are in far higher risk industries, I think there's a very different set of answers. But for typical online retail, the set of things are much smaller than I think many people believe.
Maybe understanding the things that you should care about could be best be answered if you knew what motivated the FTC or any other regulatory body to do things. Linda, do you have any insight into what motivates the FTC and where you think they're going next?
Do you know how much I'd be charging if I knew what motivated the FTC? Okay, here's the thing that motivates the FTC.
Or any other regulatory body, potentially.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
And let me tell you, the difference is the FTC, you have so many federal agencies. You have the CFPB, you've got the FTC. Then on the state side, you've got the attorney generals, but they're all looking, and the district attorneys, okay? But they're all looking at one thing, and that is your marketing. And what motivates the FTC is, can I make you an example? Can I scare the crap out of the industry because I'm gonna just lay earth with you? And that's what they do. And then they come out, next year is gonna be ugly. Next year, they're gonna start enforcing information security policies, consumer privacy protection policies. Well, hello, do you think you could maybe give us the regulations before you start the enforcement policies? And you know what they said? We're gonna have a day conference on that sometime in January. That's what they said. I'm not kidding. I don't lie about this stuff. I lie about some stuff, but that's only when I'm in court. But so I'm not lying. So watch that conference. It's in January, and they're going to have a one-day conference about information security and consumer information protection. That's really important. You know, when that first came down, and it was the Wyndham decision that came down and said, oh yeah, the FTC can sue you for deceptive advertising if you have a data breach. And when the attorneys pointed out, well, why aren't you looking at, I don't know, half the federal organizations up there? Here was their answer. This came from the commissioner. Yeah, we don't have jurisdiction over them. I mean, so you asked me, Can I tell you what motivates them? Yes. They want to scare our industry. I mean, some of these cases you look at and you go, what was he thinking?
Well, I think that matches pretty well with what David was saying earlier in terms of, are you really worried about the right things? Because if you're saying, acai berries cure cancer, yeah, you're probably going to get spiked.
If you can cure anything, you're going to get hit.
But if you're doing something else that you can reasonably say was an innocent mistake, and you weren't out there trying to, okay, you got something to share there, but then you're probably going to be okay. And I think that was David's point in the quote is there's things to worry about and there are things to worry about. And so you need to put them in perspective. Where were you going to go with that?
I was just going to say that I saw today, because I get these FTC updates or whatever, that they just took action against someone that said they could cure alcoholism. Was their recent claim. I just thought that was absurd. That's the kind of folks that they're going after.
But what they're going after is the term cure. When you get rid of everything else, nothing gets cured. We can look for a cure, but we don't ever get it. That's it. And the government does nothing for any consumer. And Obama in particular does nothing for any consumer. He doesn't give you solar. He doesn't give you benefits. If you use the government promoting something, you have doubled your risk for inquiry. If you say anything's cured, you have tripled your risk for an actual CID enforcement action. Just nothing cures anything. I know. I tried all the magic pills and none of them work. I tried all the magic creams, none of them work. If you take out this, and here's the one key: if you take out the definitive statement and you make it appearance. We don't change lines, we change the appearance of lines. We assist in weight loss, along with, in your disclosure, along with all that exercise and the 200-calorie, diet we're going to put you on. Good luck. But there are ways that you can promote every product if you just put in enough so that you give the attorney enough room to go, no, he didn't say it was a cure. Of course not. Yes, I do realize that all those photographs look like a cure, but that's your interpretation. Right here, he doesn't say cure.
So just a few more minutes. I do want to come to you, and then I did want to do a wrap up here real quickly. But when we were preparing for this, you talked about it's not just the FTC. There's other big brother type things that you need to be cognizant of. What would you put out there?
Linda certainly touched on that as well. I was going to follow on what David and Linda said, that I saw something recently that Brian Cave had done. I don't know if you saw this, Linda, but Brian Cave did a study where they did under Freedom of Information Act. They went back and got a bunch of consumer information, and you could see a direct correlation between consumer complaints and FTC actions.
Yep.
So it's really the most egregious stuff that's generating a lot of consumer complaints that certainly correlates to their action. They're really going after just the most egregious stuff that's out there for the most part. But yeah, I think it's interesting that a lot of people tend to focus on the FTC, and there are many other levers I think that marketers in this space should pay attention to. There's states attorneys general, there's serial litigators, certainly, for example, in the email space, they're one of the most prominent actors. They'll put together a spam-based case and go after folks and sort of shake them down, and it can be pretty effective. So you see an awful lot more of those than you see of FTC actions against sort of mainstream businesses. But there's a number of other things. There's internal policy requirements, there's protecting the brand, and there's things like, I know that some of the big folks that provide ad feeds are also looking very closely at what's driving traffic to those ad feeds. And that's not FTC driven, that's not really legal, but it's just to try to create a safe and sustainable marketplace, and it's pretty serious.
I think you could also consider Google an agency
nice.
too, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
If your business relies on Google traffic, they have very strict guidelines that change relatively often about what you're allowed to have on your website, what you're not, how fast your website needs to be.
And they touch so much.
And all of a sudden, your website's gone from Google. And if you want that traffic, if you don't comply with what they want, and they're often a little bit more strict than some of the agencies. And from a paid side, there's some sites that will never be able to market because Google just won't allow it. It's against their guideline.
We talked earlier about quality and value and growth. And the things that we need to talk about or need to think about going forward to be able to do those things, it's going to take some automation. And it's going to require a lot of data, because we talked earlier about, there's only so many relationships you can manage, as a person. And so those are the things, development and products and automation and scalability. Those are the things that we're looking to bring to the network quality side. Because ultimately, what I would love to be able to see the network quality team do is spend far less time taking people down. That will still happen. But ultimately, they actually become drivers of the business. They can actually go to somebody and say, hey, it's not so much you did this wrong, but you did this right. And if you did it a little bit better, or with a different advertiser who has a different rate, you could be that much more successful. That's what I would love to see network quality doing, and changing that dynamic from the cop to really more of the person who's trying to help out. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.